If you've watched my previous video on the John Wick series, then hopefully you know by now that I do actually like these movies. I consider the first one to be one of the greatest action movies of all time, and the second one substantially raises the bar in terms of stunt work and set pieces. That being said, in this, John's third outing, it's easy to see that the wheels have definitely begun to fall off the bus, and it doesn't show any signs of slowing down. Now, in my previous videos, I've made the statement that we all know why we're here. We're here for the action, the stunts, and the guns. This buys a lot of leeway from a narrative perspective, since, on its face, the more violence the better. However, despite this, the first movie still manages to offer up a compelling story, and a world that had seemingly limitless potential, at least from a writing standpoint. Bearing that in mind, from the moment the opening credits roll in Chapter 3, it's easy to see that the story has not simply been put in the back seat. It's been shoved into the trunk and is currently suffocating. Each and every line of dialogue, delivered with completely unnecessary gravitas, I might add.
See this packing. Parabellum.
Has been stripped back to its most basic context, and used as a way to shuttle John from one arbitrary fight scene to the next. The action has completely overtaken everything else about this movie, to such an extent that it's frankly ridiculous. A perfect example of what I'm talking about is when John enters the antiques warehouse. Rather than continue running, given that he's well ahead of the goons on his tail, he stops for about a minute in order to break down several antique revolvers, and recombine their parts. The resultant Franken-gun is used for exactly one shot, which is simply a lead-in for the next fight. Brushing aside the fact that this is not how firearms work, the action sequence that it tees up is frankly a bloated mess that could have easily been cut in favor of a trimmer runtime. I would have rather seen John grab a couple of single-action armies and snap off a few trick shots for a minute or so before moving on to the next batch of goons. You still get the action, but the pacing isn't dragged to a screeching halt. And really, that's my primary complaint with Chapter 3. A lot of its trademark action just goes on for way too long, feeling more self-indulgent than visceral and snappy. We see it again in the lobby shootout sequence at the tail end of the movie, which not only encapsulates everything wrong with Chapter 3, but also rams home the body armor problem I had with Chapter 2. If you know anything about firearms, then you're probably aware that the 9mm cartridge is definitely not what you want to take into a gunfight where you know the bad guys are packing next-gen body armor. Yet this is exactly what the script chooses to saddle Keanu with during the first engagement. Don't get me wrong, I'm not asking for a detailed or realistic breakdown of all the gear in this film, but they made an actual point of mentioning the round in the movie, so I figure it's fair game to call them out on it in my video. Besides, this whole gear-up scene is basically just an advertisement for TTI, the company that was responsible for Keanu Reeves' firearms training, and I've never been a particularly big fan of such blatant product placement. Anyway, the sequence that follows is basically a Call of Duty Warzone fight, where Keanu is trying to crack the bad guy's armor by dumping full magazines into them before, like I said in my previous video, closing the distance and doing some gun fu to shoot his opponent in the head. All of the tension is sucked out of this fight because once you've seen that Wick's guns are completely ineffective, you kind of lose interest in whatever combat rolls and tactical reloads he happens to be doing. Add to that the fact that, yet again, this fight is about 3 minutes too long, and I found myself looking at my watch, wondering when it was going to be over. As with the previous film, we've got the introduction of another piece of metal that becomes incredibly important to moving the plot forward: John's ticket. This thing is the definition of a prop for prop's sake. If you removed it from the script entirely, the movie would still proceed as normal. John goes to the library to get the marker, then proceeds to the opera house to meet Angelica Houston, then gets branded before shipping out to Casablanca. I do not know why this thing is here. The people he meets still know who he is without the ticket, they still would have helped him, and they still could have branded him. I don't get it, and it irritates me. This movie has enough problems without adding another MacGuffin to it, which is never seen before or used again. This method of wrapping the story around the action is something that I had a problem with in Chapter 2. And not only is it still present in Chapter 3, but it's gotten even worse. I've got a few examples here of what I'm talking about, so I'll try to be brief. But if you've got any questions about them, let me know in the comments and I'll try to provide further clarification. First up is John's use of a marker when he tries to get Halle Berry's Sophia to help him. Based on every rule we know about this series so far, he doesn't have a leg to stand on when invoking this favor. By this point, he's been rendered excommunicado, meaning that, beyond his death, He has no right or ability to interact with this world or use any of its services. Now, Sophia states this to him outright, but still goes along with him despite the fact that she stands to lose literally everything by doing so. Just because the script acknowledges this plot hole, it does not excuse the fact that it is a plot hole. It's the kind of slapdash writing that completely torpedoes what little story we're actually given for this movie, and it actively inhibited my enjoyment of it moving forward. Second, we've got the Elder, an enigmatic figure that, for reasons that are never explained, sits above the high table. This sort of vague writing worked in the first movie because we were being introduced to a completely new world. We were learning the rules as we went, and the rules themselves didn't seem that complicated. By adding a character like this, the writers have, once again, upended everything the audience thought they understood, which at this late stage in the series is more irritating than anything else. This is an important character. Somehow, he is the only person in the world that is not bound by the High Table's rules. He is the only person capable of allowing John back into the fold. And yet, he's given 10 minutes of screen time, vague dialogue, and a pointless subplot, designed to simply put John into a new location for more fight sequences. But even this could be forgiven if the Elder actually had a meaningful impact on the story beyond forcing John to cut his finger off. Excise this character and everything that happens either with him or as a result of John trying to get to him, and we've still got John in New York City at the Continental for the final showdown. John choosing to reject the Elder's mercy renders the character itself completely moot. And while this may come off as character development for John on the most surface of surface levels, look even a micron deeper and it just has him coming off as flighty. This wasn't some grand plan of his to get back to the Continental and Winston. This was him flip-flopping because the writers didn't know how to get him there in the first place. Finally, we've got the High Table, the Continental, and their relationship to each other. Now, this could just be how I had interpreted their respective positions, but until this movie, I had presumed that the Continental organization was completely separate to the High Table, able to hold on to its power because of its neutrality. With the introduction of the Adjudicator, once again, my understanding of the world has been upended, so they could introduce yet another plot device in that character. The fundamental neutrality of the Continental should have been the plot thread that the writers tugged on, specifying that because Winston broke the Continental organization's neutrality, that was what gave them the in, not because he served at their discretion and therefore could be removed at will. The way they wrote this subplot undercuts the effectiveness of what the Continental is supposed to be, or at the very least what I presumed it to be. So, whereas before we had a powerful and highly effective organization that stands apart as a beacon of peace in the Wiccan world, now we've got just another arm of the High Table that isn't actually neutral, and can be destroyed just as easily as everything else can. It's a disservice to the concept, and I think it was a grave mistake on the writer's part to do that to the organization. John Wick Chapter 3 is a mess of a movie. All the saturated neon and spent bullet casings in the world cannot distract from this fact. Even the action scenes, which are still impressive from a technical standpoint, have gotten bloated to such an extent that they feel way longer than they need to be. And this isn't an opinion I've formed as a result of subsequent viewings, by the way. Even after my first screening 6 whole years ago, I remember walking out of the theater saying that this had to be the last one. It was a satisfying enough conclusion to a series that had revolutionized the action genre, and it was a story that had clearly reached its end. But, with the benefit of hindsight, we all know how that one turned out. Anyway, that's all I've got for you this time, so if you could do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe buttons, I'd really appreciate it. Every little bit really helps me out. Also, go ahead and check out the other videos on my channel, or hit up my website to see my blog and maybe buy one of my books on Amazon. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.